So here's a look at the engine that I used to pull the 32 cars, and actually I've pulled more than that now, but I was asked about the gearing, so in this video I'm going to talk about the gearing, and just let you know this engine here is the one that had the chassis that was underneath that engine, and so this engine has been, or that chassis, which is now here, has been doing a lot of pulling, so it actually has the original set of gears. Now I've removed the screws so that I can get to this pretty quickly. You can see that I have two brushless motors. I have a little tray up top here for the speed controllers to rest on. The speed controller and the motor are hooked to the truck. So when the truck moves, the speed controller and the motor move. And then I just have these, all the wires come up and go across the top. And this piece here is actually the mount for the speaker, because it does have a Bluetooth speaker inside, and that's how I get sound from the train. If you look close, you can see that there is a charge port, a USB port, so that I can actually charge that while it's in the engine itself, so there's no reason to remove it. As far as the gearing, we'll just start here at the wheels, and I have just a solid axle on all four of the axles, and we have a EPDM rubber that connects the axle that's being driven to the other axle, and that's how power's transferred from the axle with the gear on it to the axle that does not have gearing. Now this is not a direct drive. You notice it'll slip. However, if need be, I could add a second band on the other side of the gear, so having dual bands on the axle would give me twice the grip. However, a single band has been sufficient, and I really see no reason to add a second band, so I'm not going to. So we're going to leave it like that. Now the worm gear is attached to the motor, and I have a setup over here that is out of a train. This is actually one that I'm building or putting together now. You can see I have the little tray for the ESC to mount, and then the worm is mounted on the shaft of the motor, and then the other gear is mounted on the axle. And these gears are 3D printed in a carbon fiber material, and they're holding up very well. Now these gears here, this gear set here, have been run the most, and you can see those gears are still in really good shape even after like 3 hours of pulling the 32 car, 34 car train. You can see those gears are in pretty good shape still. So I'm going to run them until they fail, and that's why I actually moved this chassis over to a new body, just so that I had a matching set, and by having a matching set, then I could use one as a battery car, which is what this here is. You notice it's flat. There's no speaker mount. There's no provisions for the trucks. Notice there you can see, and actually here you can see how that chassis is cut out so that the truck can float, and there's room in here for the gears. But notice there's nothing like that in this car or in this chassis, and that's because this is the battery chassis. And the wires, notice I have a channel here on either side, and that's so the wires can slide in and out as needed. And I have the same thing on the back end, because I can run the wires either out the front or out the rear of this chassis. So in a sense, I could run the engine this way, or I could turn it around and run it this way, and I can still get power to the engine, because now I would be using the front end instead of the rear end, or vice versa. And also the hatch where I get to the batteries is a simple spring-loaded hatch that's actually, I designed this to be very easy to access, and it's very easy to print. It's 2 pieces, and you bend a couple of pieces of wire and you wind up making a hatch that's spring-loaded. A spring out of a pin works just fine. So now we can see the hatch, the battery car, the engine, the drive setup, and then how I transfer power from the driven axle to the floating axle. And it's just using a piece of EPDM rubber. And again, it works really well. The speed controller, again, sets up on with the motor. It's all mounted to the truck. And then the receiver sits in the back. And the lights, I have a lighting circuit. You can see here, there's a lighting circuit that actually plugs into a channel on the receiver. And that controls the interior light as well as the headlights. And also, one other thing, you notice there's a lot of tape in there, and that's because I've actually blacked out the inside of this cab. That way no light passes through to the outside. So the only light you see from inside is going to be going through the windows or the windshield or out the headlights. So that's what when I talk about blacking out the cab, that's what I'm talking about. It's just adding the tape. So that's a look at the drive setup. Now, one other thing, I did use or attempt to use a brass gear setup initially, because I wasn't quite sure how well this was all going to hold up, and I wanted this thing to last. I wanted it to be very durable. So I did invest in some brass gears. However, the problem with the brass gears is that there's a lot of friction, and the friction generates heat, and the plastic does not like the heat. It of course melts. So therefore, whenever I was running for long periods of time, I would actually lose the adjustment in my gearing, and I could hear the gears starting to skip. And of course, immediately I stopped and tried to figure out what was going on. And then I realized, well, there's a lot of heat buildup in the gearing. So then I went back and designed this worm gear setup. And again, the worm goes on the motor, and then the other gear goes on the axle, and a band just connects those front axle and rear axle together. So if you have any questions, you can leave a comment or send me an email or give me a phone call, and I'll help you as best I can. Thank you for your time, and enjoy the hobby.